afternoon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It really is an honor for me to be here this morning. Before I start, I'd like to wish all the ladies happy International Women's Day. And I see the ladies are waving in the audience. But with that, I'd also like to say thank you to the gentlemen around the room. And I tend to be very biased towards gentlemen because I'm one of those who benefited quite a lot from the mentoring that I got from men. For my sins, I've only had male bosses, and for 15 years of my career, and I think there are men that are really supportive of women's career. So to ladies, happy Women's Day, but to men, thank you very much for supporting gender diversity. Tommy has done a good job in sort of telling a bit of our story. So before I go into the issues of regulations, let me tell you a bit about SAPVIA. I think most of you would probably know who we are. But the full name of our association is called the South African Photovoltaic Industry Association. We are about 12 to 13 years. We've been around since about 2010, similar to Tommy's organization. We were established just before the REAP program. We were just with just 6 people. And I keep saying we, and I was far from being part of a we because I just started 10 months ago. Today's the 8th. Tomorrow it will be 10 months at SAPVIA. And today we have a membership complement of about 580. And our membership complement ranges from project developers to IPPs, to original equipment manufacturers. So essentially we have moved from guys that just operate in the IPP space to represent all the actors that operate across the solar PV value chain, including the banks. I heard there were a conversation about banks. The 4 major banks in South Africa are members of SAPVIA, and believe it or not, Eskom is also a member of ours, and I saw Ronald there. I was going to talk to him about our membership fees for this year, but yeah, we'll take it offline. So essentially, that's who we are. What we support our members with is it's a bit about market intelligence, being ahead of the curve, what's the installed capacity, what's the potential in specific areas. We issue reports that influence policy within government. We host networking events and so on and so forth. But if you want to know about SAPVIA, I'm more than happy to give you additional information. But I've been asked to talk about the regulatory framework in South Africa and where we see the opportunities, and from our experience at SAPVIA, where we have witnessed the growth. You would know, maybe most of you, through the news, through the interviews, that our electricity plan for the country is the integrated resource plan. I always say I don't know why we decided to call electricity resources, because it could be a bit of a misleading. Electricity is not our only resource, but really it's an infrastructure development plan, and it is based on the least cost electricity supply and demand balance. And there are 2 things that those that develop the IRP, which is currently under the Ministry of Department of Minerals, Resources and Energy. It keeps changing the name quite a lot, but they consider 2 things: security of supply and the impact on the environment. And that is because as South African government is a signatory to a number of global agreements, including Paris Agreement. We do have quite a substantial share. We don't think it's enough as an industry, a renewable industry in general, but solar PV sector specifically. We have an allocation of just over 20 gigawatts by 2030. And this amounts to just less than 18 gigawatts for wind power and just over 8 for solar PV. And we are on record saying that we do not understand how that was achieved, because what the developments on the ground are contradictory to what the IRP has stipulated. I must say that this policy or this plan really governs how government itself procures electricity. So these targets are set for government, and they largely exclude private projects that have now been enabled by the current regulatory reforms that I'll talk to shortly. But essentially what then happens is government identifies a structure within itself. In the case for a long time, that structure has been ESCOM, which developed their own capacity. But with the renewable energy portion, they established the Independent Power Producers Office, IPPO. And you would hear periodically that the minister would then determine what that IPP office would procure. And if you are familiar with that space, you would know that we are at bid window 6 of that procurement, which are simply procurement rounds. But there are other windows along the way. There is risk mitigation. There is, I think, bid window 4.5. But by and large, government has procured renewable energy program through 6 or just about 7 bids, with the recent one on storage having come out just a couple of, I think, days ago, actually. So that's how it procures its electricity. However, with the recent reforms that were pronounced under the era being the law that governs electricity in the country, the Electricity Regulation Act. There are exemptions that have always been in the era that have been amended quite frequently or regularly in the past couple of years, I think, from 2020, when this energy or electricity challenge became a huge issue. And I keep saying electricity because our energy challenges are actually bigger than electricity. Sometimes whenever we talk about electricity, we refer to it as energy. It is a mere 30 or 35 to 40% of our energy usage. People would say that one of our blind spots is really providing security around liquid fuels. It's a topic for another day, and probably will affect most of you seated around the room. But what that regulation, the amendment to the regulation did, was initially it exempted. It lifted the threshold of projects that are exempted from getting generation licenses from NESA. I think the threshold was first increased to 100 megawatts, and now there is no threshold, which means there is a huge opportunity for the private sector to play in that space, including some of you that are seated here. There are obviously compliance and licenses that you still require to set up your facility. I will list a couple of them now. But compared to 2-3 years ago, in 2023, you are able and empowered to do a lot more than you were able to do in 2019. So whilst there are limitations within government, I think that's one of the catalysts that government has done. Maybe they even announced it too early, because with that came the challenges of now you are interested in developing this project. How do you then actually connect it to the grid? And I think that's maybe Ronald has already talked about grid access and the work that ESCOM is doing around grid planning, investment into the grid infrastructure, and really clarifying the rules for accessing the very limited resource. So some of the things that are being touted, not really within ESCOM, is how should whether there is a possibility of exploring a triple P similar to what we saw in the REAP program for the development of transmission network. So there is a big opportunity that has been enabled by the relaxation of the regulatory framework. I do know that most of the sector would always advocate for an update of ERA. I think it should be updated. I support that. The update of the IRP, it should be updated. However, you should not look at the IRP from what you are allowed to do. As industry, you can do much more, because that allocation that is captured in the IRP is for how government itself will procure power. What you are doing collectively falls out of that IRP stipulation. So once you have identified an interest and an opportunity to develop a project, and you have an offtake agreement, and you adopt a Mafube example. By the way, I think it's a fantastic project. I've heard about it, but I don't think we make enough noise about what communities can achieve if they put their heads together. So I really think it's commendable. And I do hope that we will see more of those kinds of projects coming up. Of course, you have to work with government, and I think some of the proposals or recommendations do make sense. And I also think Mafube municipality is quite visionary, because one of the key challenges, regulatory challenges for really connecting your projects on the grid comes from the municipality. So we do know that there are challenges for connecting projects onto the Eskom network, especially in high resource areas such as the Northern Cape, the Eastern Cape. However, for projects that are embedded in municipalities, most municipalities still do not allow for you to connect to their network. They don't have rules and regulations in place. And there are reasons that are being provided for that, such as the loss of revenue and so on and so forth. But the truth is, people are doing it anyway. So you might as well open it up, set the rules, so that people are able to connect legally. So those are some of the regulatory hurdles that we currently facing as a country. That's why organizations like ours, SAPVIA, are working closely with SALGA to make sure that we unlock that regulatory barriers that limit investment into solar PV projects. And really what we do as an association, we primarily act on behalf of our members. But if our members get businesses, you get the services, and you keep your lights on and your business get to grow. I think I will sort of close off by highlighting two things, that solar is a great solution. However, to the previous speakers, it's one of the solutions. And solar works extremely well with storage. So in thinking about where the opportunities are and technologies that you need to deploy, do think about a suite of solutions, because no one solution will meet all your needs. So don't be duped by somebody who sells you heaven and earth or a silver bullet. There is no such. And I think I would also like to echo the sentiment that was expressed by others. Do get technical support or insights. There are people who claim to know everything. Yes, there are people who know a lot more than that, others. But this industry is relatively new, and you want to identify credible sources or people that will help you. If you do not understand, the types of Eskom are very supportive, and they will answer your questions. If you really want questions answered, call SAPVIA to find out whether, what's happening in your municipality, in your locality. Are you allowed to connect? Those are things that we are able to do. And I think the one point that was made is around collaboration. I know the banks are said to really have their own limitation, but we have seen huge support for renewable energy products and solutions. Nedbank is our member. I did know that, as the chairman has indicated, they announced their results. There is a lot more that's happening in other banks. A really, really good story. Maybe just to give you figures of what is happening in the solar space. There is about 2.4 gigawatt installed capacity at utility scale. From 2019 to 2020, to 2022, end of 2022, about 3 gigawatts of projects have been registered with NESA. 3 gigawatts in 4 years. 80% of those projects are solar PV. And the numbers are just mind-boggling. They keep growing. So that sector, is that my cue too? Okay. I thought, you know how chair people start waving when your time is over, so I just wanted to get a sense of whether it's my cue to close off. So that's what we are sitting with. 2.9 gigawatts of registered projects. And last year alone, in 2022 alone, we exceeded 1 gigawatt of installed capacity. And this is still at embedded generation. There was no single utility project or projects that came online in 2022. We are sitting on a revolution, but do not be duped. I think that's a message. Do not waste your money. Do not be swayed by somebody who will come and sell you heaven and earth. Be reasonable. Reach out to the likes of SAPVIA, Tommy is here. Reach out to ESCOM if you are unsure about certain things. Reach out to us. It's in our best interest that we advise you so that our members can get business. In terms of the regulatory requirements for setting up this big project, although you don't need, most projects have now been exempted from generation license from NESA. You still need to go through your environmental authorization. So the lead times for development of these projects is still probably 1.5 years to 2 years to develop it, and maybe 2 years to construct. Depending on how long it takes, for instance, for your project to be registered with NESA. Just because you don't need generation license doesn't mean that your project won't need to be registered. And there's a process that needs to follow. You need to follow a certain process with ESCOM to connect your project to the grid. You need to get environmental authorization. You need to get your water use licenses, your agriculture subdivision permits. So you need all those. Just because you don't need a license doesn't mean that you don't need those requirements. So I suppose these requirements are applicable to those that develop projects, those that would provide services to you. But you need to know so that somebody doesn't say you'll have a solution in 1.5 years, especially tens of megawatts of projects. The smaller projects tend to take a shorter period of time than the smaller ones. But yeah, I think lastly, let's collaborate. Let's collaborate as farmers. Let's collaborate as associations that represent farmers. There is no need for one entity to reinvent the wheel. SON SA as SAPVIA, we are available to provide the advice that you need, because it's in our best interest that we have electrons onto the grid. Because if we don't collectively work towards that, we are all going to suffer. With our economy going, you perpetuate the impacts of, the socio-economic impacts that we have as a country. And those who have will not enjoy what they have, because there will be a lot of social unrest. So it's in our best interest to solve this energy challenge. It's in our best to do it collaboratively and collectively. There is no need for any of us to reinvent the wheel. And let's help each other. Let's be free with the information that we share. And we're not going to solve an energy challenge which has been in the making for over decades in a year. But I do believe that if we work together and put our heads together, this is a challenge that we can collectively at least alleviate to a certain extent in the next couple of years. I don't think we'll be offload shedding in a year or two, to be honest. But we definitely can be in 3 or 4 years. Thank you.